I decided to use the space theme collection from Carta Bella to make this easy but fun mini album. So if you'd like to see how I made it, stay tuned. Hi guys, it's Beth. Welcome. I have been really good at using up the holiday themed pads and like collections like this in my stash, but I've been really bad about using kind of like the just general or non-specific holiday or season themed, and so I decided this year I really need to focus on that. So I decided to pull out one of those awkward collections you get if you do like the Echo Park warehouse box. This one is called Space Academy. I have girls and neither one of them, I mean, they enjoy space. They enjoy learning about space and looking at stars, but they're not real super space fanatics. So I could not use this for my own kids, but since I do, I sound like I'm 8. Since I do craft shows, I thought maybe I would start this collection because, you know, whenever I start a pad or a collection project, I always start with like my biggest projects first. So I thought I would try to make like a little, at least one mini album out of here, kind of a really simple, basic mini album that, you know, it might be fun for a mom of a space-loving boy to use for some pictures. So I thought I would start with that and then make cards with the rest. I thought this might be a fun theme for cards for Cubs. Or yes, cards for Cubs. That's coming up. So we are going to work through this collection together. I was going to finally try out the Meme Made It, the folios that I've seen everybody make, but I really thought craft cardstock would work well with these. I didn't want to do black because there's a lot of dark colors. White, it's not a true white, and I had a cream, but it was too creamy. I don't know. I didn't love it. And the craft I had, it was a weird light craft color, not like this darker craft. And it was only 65 pounds and I wanted something heavier. And the black cardstock I have, it's also more of a lightweight. So I'm going to put off the folio for another project, but I do enjoy making envelope albums and they are pretty simple to put together. And I had found these giant envelopes, 5 3/4 by 8 3/4 inches. They were on clearance at Hobby Lobby. I don't make cards that size, but I bought them because $2.50 for 50 envelopes was pretty good to make album bases with. So that's what we're going to make today. We're going to try and get at least one album. These envelopes were pretty sturdy, so I was glad to see that. Here I'm just adding a 1/4 inch score line to like the outside of the natural envelope flap fold, and that's because that first envelope is going to be my front cover and that flap will create the spine to my album. For all these other envelopes, I'm just folding the flaps back, and then just like this, where I'm kind of auditioning it, making sure it's going to fit in cleanly and nicely, I'm just going to add adhesive to the outside of all the flaps and then tuck them in to the envelope opening, to the opening on the envelope just before it. So one good thing about using wet glue for this is that you have some wiggle room. You can slide it around to make sure that you get a nice even fit. So on some of these you can see I have to fiddle with them a little bit just to make sure that the outer edges of my envelopes are going to line up, so that way my pages are all lined up and clean. There are some envelopes that are wonky enough that I end up having to just trim the outer edges because they just don't line up, but these were awesome. Definitely a good clearance find. And for 50 albums, you could get quite a few, 50 envelopes, you get quite a few albums out of it. So just continuing adding in the flaps
to the openings. And you don't have to use wet glue, but you do want to use some really good adhesive, like your red tape or score tape. So this last one, once I put the envelope in, or the flap in the opening, I put that outer flap on the back of it, and that kind of closed up the spine. And so now it's nice and neat. And like I said, it is fairly sturdy. I really struggled with measurements, and today, on this particular day, I measured that album several times and trimmed the paper down several times to try and get it right. And for some reason, the measurement wasn't sticking in my head. And at some point, I added an inch to the album. It just, for some, yeah, it was a struggle on this day. Some days you got it, some days you don't. And on this day, I did not. So I should have written it down. Sometimes you just get too many things going through your head, and either that or it's age. It could be a combination of both. So this is where I'm like, I swear I measured it, and how am I an inch off? It's because I just added an inch. So now we are getting close. I wanted to have about 1/8 of an inch around the pattern paper, like as a border. So I wanted about 1/8 of an inch showing on all sides, like of the envelope showing on all sides of my pattern paper. I'm going to use one of these cut aparts to embellish the cover. I just thought like it was the perfect width for one, and it would just kind of add a nice title to my album cover. And here I'm just looking for something that I wanted to use on the back cover. I decided to go with this spaceship orbiting scene. At least now I've got the size down, and it doesn't take me near as long to trim this page as it did the front cover. I'm just trying to figure out how I want to cut it. Like, what do I want to cut off? What do I want to preserve? That was the hard part on that one. I had found this little brad and cord pack in my stash and was going to try and use it as a closure for the album, but the cord wasn't stretchy, and I didn't really want to use it as a closure if I couldn't, like if it wouldn't allow room to grow, like once I put pictures in. But I had wanted to test it at this point because I wanted, if I'm going to put brads in the covers, to hook the twine or the cord on, I needed to do that before I started decorating the inside of the covers. So I checked it out, but decided to go without it. So now I can just go through and finish decorating up the cover here, and then trim down the pages for the inside of the album. If you get like the Echo Park warehouse boxes, and I've gotten some other warehouse boxes from other companies, and the collections haven't been quite as diverse. But if you get the Echo Park warehouse boxes, you always tend to get like one weird collection that, doesn't really fit either your style or your like what projects you tend to do. This was one for me that, like I said, I knew I couldn't use it on my girls, but I was hoping that there was some other family out there that could make use of it for, their kids, if I could make something with it. And so kind of, it's a challenge, but it was really fun, like playing with some of these patterns. Like the scenes were amazing. Like I loved the kind of vintage space vibe. I had a lot of fun and was glad that I was able to find something that I could make with it and enjoy the collection, since it wasn't, even if I'm not keeping it, I'm having fun playing with it. And I've got a bunch of these collections from over the years from the Echo Park warehouse boxes, and so that's kind of what I need to try and work on using this year because those are the ones that are still sitting in my bin of collections. And some of these patterns I hated cutting down, and so like I was trying to preserve as much of the scene as I could. And then on all of them I am trimming off the branding strips because you never know, I may use them on the cards later. And as I was playing with this, I definitely got a Jetsons vibe, especially on that collection with the people, and then this one with kind of like the little space town. I don't know if any of you remember the Jetsons cartoon. I watched it a lot when I was growing up. And in fact, we have a Roomba that I named Rosie after Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. I was glad that some of the B sides of the papers were not so busy, so I could kind of mix some of those in with my pages. On this particular page, I do want to use some of the journal cards as, like journal cards that I can tuck into the album, but I needed some more patterns for my pages, and so I decided to just cut it in half and keep half of the journal cards and then use the other half as a page. So all my pages are cut down, and now I'm going to add I want to add some interactive elements to the album. So I'm going to start with some of those scraps that I thought would make great pockets. Like they're a little bit too wide, but they're the perfect height. So I just need to trim a little bit off of the side, and then they fit perfectly as pockets. So I'm just kind of flipping through, trying to figure out what might work for each page, and decide to go with the cut apart that, was smaller than it. I had already cut some of it off when I was trimming down the page, but worked perfectly as a pocket. And now on this, like the Space Age page, I'm not adding a pocket, but it's going to be like a flap. That's what the interactive element is going to be. I was just trying to decide there if there was anything else I wanted to do, and decided that that was going to be enough. So before I add any adhesive, like before I glue anything in, I always kind of lay out my pages in the order that I want them to go, just to make sure that, both facing pages coordinate and look okay together, and that my interactive elements aren't all kind of grouped in the same part, like they're spread out throughout the album. And then I realized at some point that I had missed some pages, so now it's just a matter of gluing them in. And again, I use my Barely Arts glue, and then I burnish them down. So you'll see that for the inside pages of the album, there's more like a 1/16 of an inch border. And, it's totally up to you what type of, if you even want a border. You don't have to have a border. You can cover the whole page. So if you've noticed, I'm not giving you dimensions as to what I'm cutting the papers down, because odds are you don't have this size envelope. You could use any size envelope that you wanted. I'm just telling you that I trim mine so that, either they're 1/4 of an inch smaller than the envelope size, or 1/8 of an inch, whatever. It's just, like I said, odds are you don't have this exact size. I added my pocket just by doing glue on the sides and the bottom, and then adding that page into the album. And I had touched on, like I'm using wet glue. You could use any wet glue that you want, and I like to burnish it down just to make sure that it's going to hold and it's going to have a tight hold. Again, you could use score tape here or redline tape. I just would not use like a tape dispenser. Like I don't know that type of adhesive would hold well. One nice thing, this is Carta Bella paper, and one nice thing about Carta Bella paper is that it is pretty strong. It's like not a flimsy paper. So between the weight of the pattern paper and then the album pages like the envelope pages itself, like this album will be nice and sturdy, and I do like that. Definitely a much better choice than the cardstock that I had wanted to use, because I was going to make a similar structured album just with cardstock, so glad I remembered I had these envelopes. Now I'm hoping that there is some kid who would love to put, photos in here, but to be honest, like this is one of those albums that I could just look at, without photos. Like I think the patterns are super fun, the scenes were fun. So, and that's one of those that I could just look at, but hopefully there is some kid, boy or girl, that could make good use of this. For this last page, for the flap, I just grabbed a craft scrap that I had, craft colored scrap that I had. It was just a strip, and I didn't necessarily worry about width, but I just wanted to make sure it was going to be long enough to fit my patterned paper piece. This is going to be the hinge for my lift the flap element here. So I just folded it in half length widthwise, and then added glue to one side, and then added the folded part to the outer side of my patterned paper. And then now I'm going to glue the other side down to the album page. And then this just, like I said, creates kind of a lift the flap, and you could put a photo on the outside, on the inside of the flap, a photo on the base page under the flap, or you could just hide something under the flap. There's a lot of possibilities. Now that all my pages are in, I have the fun part of embellishing the album. I decided to go ahead and use the rest of these cut-aparts in the album instead of saving them for cards. I just wanted to have some fun things tucked into those pockets. So I trim up all of the cut-aparts. And these are like, 4x6 size. And I'm going to add, in this first pocket, I add one 4x6 and two of those other odd-shaped cut-aparts, and then this one will have two 4x6s and then that long cut-apart. And just again, it makes for some fun things to pull out. You can add more pictures too. On the front of the album, I don't do much other than add some planets there, and because it is the album cover, even though the stickers are really good, I wanted to add some extra adhesive so that they don't fall off, if it gets tucked in a shelf in between things. And I was really bummed because that stargazer word, when I pulled it off, the R tore, and I was hoping that once I put it down, I could maybe mend it together, but it wasn't going, like you could still see that it was torn, so I was super bummed. So back on the sheet that goes. I don't add tons of stickers to the pages because I do feel like there's already a lot going on, and in some cases I don't want to take up room for photos, or I don't want to mess up the scene that's already there. So I'm just trying to find things that I could add that might enhance. So here I'm just using one of the border stickers on that inside edge there, and that's all I do. Just adds a little bit of something, adds some dimension, a little bit of interest. On this pocket, I just decided to create a little scene with some of the other spaceship, like one of the other spaceships and a planet, I believe. And I really wanted to use those tickets on this page, and I was trying to do it at the bottom, but the tickets were too wide, so I just go at the top and just put it next to the word Space Age and trim off what I don't need. And then I decided to go wild and add that giant blue star there onto the page because it just made all the difference, right? On this page, I decided to use the border strip sticker at the top and the bottom. And then I decide I really want to use that stargazer sticker, so I decide to trim off the R and just use stargaze and add that. And then I just add some final items, and then my album will be done.
Okay, so I finished the album, and I think I'm going to make this part 1, and in this video here, and in part 2 we will make the cards. So again, you saw me make this album. It's really kind of like a simple, not heavily embellished album, and that is because I want to be able to sell it kind of at lower cost at the craft show. I just think, I don't know the demand for a space theme album, so I'm not sure like how much it would really go for if I like really made an in-depth, heavily embellished, time-intensive album. So I kept it simple. I thought surely there's some kid out there who loves space, and his mom was like, oh, that would be great to document all the photos of my kids or my boy, whatever, girl, could be girl. But these are the scraps I have left. I have like a bunch of, mostly almost a half sheet left of pattern paper, and then some smaller scraps, and then the stickers that I will be able to make some cards with for part 2. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully this gave you an idea of what you can do with some of these interesting themed collections that you get when you order a warehouse box, whether it be from Echo Park or Photo Play or Simple Stories, any of them that do the warehouse box. Sometimes you get some really random collections. So this is how I'm choosing to use this one. But again, hopefully it gave you some inspiration. Thank you guys so much for your time, and hope you have a very crafty day.